Layers are going to be what you build with inside of After Effects. So let's take a moment to explore them in depth and some of the cool things you need to be able to do. I've opened up the project O3 Layers. It's got several starting points inside of here. Let's begin with 3.1 Scale Start. In this case, we're working with a vector layer. I want you to notice something. If I press the S key for scale and I start to scale this up, it gets bigger. But look at the results. It's really jagged. Well, that's because vector layers are initially kept as just pixels. And if you scale them, you can start to see the edges of those pixels. Pixels are just squares of light. They're building blocks. But if you zoom them in, they start to look soft or ragged. But down here, there's an important switch. So what we're going to do is come into the timeline here and click the button to toggle switches and modes. Here is a new option. It looks like a sun. And if I click it and enable, what it's going to do is continuously rasterize. Look at how that went perfectly clean, instantly. This switch will increase the processing time, but it ensures that the layer itself draws correctly and converts it from vector to a smoother graphic. And what this does if you're working with vector sources is it continuously rasterizes or redraws them using the vector information, giving you greater flexibility to scale. For example, if we continue the scale effect here, I'm pushed in 3000%, and it's absolutely crisp. This is one of the key benefits of using vector sources in After Effects. In this case, an imported Illustrator file, but you can also create vectors inside of After Effects directly. All right, let's keep going. Let's come here to 3.2 Trace Start. And what I want to do is trace this layer. So with the layer selected, I'm going to go to the Layer menu and choose Auto Trace. This will take the selected layer and allow us to trace it. If I click Preview, I can get an idea of what's going to happen. But in this case, it's pretty straightforward, so I'll just click OK. Now, After Effects converts that layer into a new traced layer here. There it is. This is going to be useful because, for example, if I press M, I can see the mask. Now, for example, we can take that mask and actually apply it to other layers. I can copy it, select the footage layer here, and paste. And if we look at that, you see now that the shape is being applied to the footage layer, letting us mask or trap the video layer inside of this actual shape, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's keep going here and take a look at alignment. If you go to Alignment Start, you'll see that we've got a bunch of elements and they're not very well aligned. Now, I probably should have taken care of this in the other application where I built this if this was an Illustrator file. But in this case, these are a bunch of individual files and they're just not lining up. But fortunately, After Effects has some great tools for this. What I can do is select all of the layers. I'll do that by shift-clicking. Now, if I go into the Window menu, I can choose Align. This gives me specific controls. Now, for example, I can align the selection on the bottom edge, or on the top edge, or visually centered. Now, in this case, these elements are all similar in height, so I'm just going to not see much of a difference if I change this. But if they were different heights, aligning them to the top, the middle, or the bottom can create a different effect. Additionally, you see the ability to distribute these individual objects. So, for example, I can tell it to align them or distribute them horizontally. And now they're equally spaced. Now what I'm going to do is actually take this and nest them. Layer, Pre-compose. And we'll call these controls. And I'm going to move them all into the new comp. There it is. So controls is inside of this other comp. Now what I can do is center this in relationship to the composition itself. Now with these layers selected, let's choose Layer, Pre-compose. And what I'm going to do is move all of these. And what I'm going to do is move all of these into the new comp and click OK. We'll call this control bar. Now, this is placed inside of the other composition. And if I open it up, you'll see we have all of our individual controls inside. Additionally, as you're working, besides aligning these things to each other, you can also align them to things like the composition. For example, align to the top edge, or the bottom edge, or center overall exactly in the middle. Now, let's undo 2 steps, Command Z, one more, and in this case, I'll just center it top to bottom. And that works really nicely. We can now get precise control. And we'll distribute these in relationship to the selection, and we've got a good visual balance. All right, the use of alignment and this specific panel is quite useful if you need to precisely place elements within the frame. We'll open up 3.4, link start. And this is similar to where we just were. Earlier, we used parenting when we talked about the concept of a hand, so that the hand can move and the fingers go with it, but they can independently animate. Well, what I want to do is attach this to a null. A null is an invisible object that can control other objects. It's the force. Let's choose Layer, New, Null Object. There it is. And now I can select the other layers and just parent them to that null. Now watch what happens. S for scale. Let's turn on the stopwatch. P for position. Turn on the stopwatch. And what we can do here is add another set of keyframes. So maybe this null scales and moves off the frame and up a little bit or down. The null object now brings those all in. Additionally, you can click the cube icon here to promote this to 3 dimensions. So now, for example, that can actually have a little bit of rotation on the y-axis. Let's just add another keyframe here. And we'll say start turned a little bit, 90 degrees or maybe 180. And now it rotates into place, turning in 3D, as if on a turntable. That's pretty cool. The null object can control all of that and have everything follow along. Look at how it animates. Now, let's do a few cool things. I'm going to come here and select the rest of these objects and press S for scale. Now, let's mouse over here and I'm going to press the key next to the number 1. Accent grave on most keyboards makes it bigger. I'm going to turn those stopwatches on for scale, come here to the beginning, and just shrink those all down. We'll go to 0, in fact. So now what's going to happen is those individual icons are going to grow. Plus, the main null is growing. I'll press the accent grave key again and watch what happens. A double scale. They appear and get larger, which is pretty cool. Let's add a little R for rotation. I'll press the X on Graph key again to maximize the space. And I'm going to click on the Z-axis here, go forward, and we'll do 4 spins. X on Grav, and watch what happens. Now the icons are spinning within their containers, even though there's a double spin going. This is the concept of that hand. The fingers can wiggle, but the hand can move around at the same time. All right, let's introduce one more concept here, and that's this one here. If you look closely, you'll see there's a switch for motion blur. I'm going to globally enable that. Also, let's select all the layers here and click the triangle to close them. Now, we'll click and enable motion blur for all the layers. Now, look at the effect. As they come into play, there's a little bit of blur, and it looks more natural. If you want to control that blur, let's park on a frame. You can really see that effect there. The ones at the outside edge are spinning faster, so they blur more. I can go under Composition Settings here and look at the shutter angle. Let's double that to 360. This is actually referring to the shutter angle of a camera. And just like a real cinema camera, changing the shutter angle is going to affect the amount of blur. Look how it increased there. So now as those are spinning, there's more motion blur effect. And we get the double rise here. And they spin into place. All right. This concept of linking using null objects and parenting is a great way to simplify complex animations inside of After Effects. You can animate individual elements and then just use a null to move them around. Okay, let's explore masks next. Let's take a look at 3.5 Mask End. In this case, I want you to look closely at what's happening. The buttons have taken on an interesting visual property. There's in fact some footage moving inside of it. And on top, we have our main buttons. Well, let's explore this here. I'm going to open these up, and I see a few things at play. Buttons, footage, and a stroke effect. All right, let's go here to 3.5 Mask Start. How do we do it? Well, to start, I'm going to scale these buttons up a little bit. S for scale, and make them bigger. Notice that the footage also scaled. If you don't want that to happen, you can unlink them here under Parenting. So S for scale. Now what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. Edit, duplicate. Shortcut is Command or Control D, just like really any other Adobe app. And let's put a copy down below. Now I'll turn this off. Instead of having 2 layers both called buttons, I'll press the Return key and I'm going to rename this Strokes. And we can go under the selected layer here and choose Layer, Layer Styles, Stroke. And it applies a stroke to the layer. I'll set that to be a white color, more of a off-white there, a light gray, and tell it to be an outside stroke. We can adjust the thickness here. I'll go with 15 to start, and tell it to be on the outside of the existing layer. Now, here's our footage. And I want that footage to be contained inside the button's shape. So what we can do is select the footage layer and come down here to these switches. Remember, if you don't see them, click the Toggle Switches button. Here, we're going to go to the Track Matte column, and I'll say use the buttons as a matte. Watch closely what happens when I choose this. The buttons layer is disabled. And what it does instead is cut a shape. It's like a cookie cutter pushing through the dough, cuts a hole. So now that shape is putting the footage in between. If I lower the opacity of the bottom layer there for that stroke, it's a little more subtle. And now we've got our buttons with the footage inside and the other layer containing the stroke. This is a classic technique that you might do in graphic design, but now we're actually working with elements that can be animated or using it as a mask on a footage layer. After Effects layers are a lot like Photoshop layers or Illustrator layers, and it makes it easy to create complicated stacked effects. All right, let's keep exploring. We just used a track mat, but we also talked about masks earlier. Let's revisit those, as they can be useful if you want to lift something from one layer and apply it to another. Here's the end result. I've got a piece of footage here from this very retro feeling of mixtapes, and we've trapped it inside the play circle. And we've trapped it inside the play triangle. Well, how do we do it? Well, pretty simple. Earlier, you might recall we worked with this shape. And it can be scaled, transformed, modified, etc. Rotate it. Pretty straightforward. I'll undo here. Well, if I select that layer and press M, I see the mask, or MM will give me all the mask properties. This makes it easy to click on that mask and choose Copy. Now, I can come down to the footage layer here and actually paste it in just a moment. Let's find that source. Here's that source layer there. Let's just drag through and have a look. Here we go. There's the footage. All right, let's add that in. We'll drag it into the comp and place it above the background. Now, select the mask, and I'll choose Edit, Copy. Highlight the footage layer and choose Edit, Paste. Now we could turn off the mask layer and see what's inside. Well, so far so good. We've got our footage, but it's not exactly right. So let's tweak this a bit. What I can do is take a look at the mask. And I see the footage layer itself. So with the mask selected, I'm going to press Command or Control T for free transform. If I hold down the Option or the Alt key, I can scale it like such. If I hold down the Shift key, it constrains it. And this makes it easy to kind of adjust where that's going to go. Similarly, if I press S, I can scale the footage. So notice how these two are interplayed. Select the mask, Command T, we can rotate the mask without rotating the footage. Select the layer and press Command T. Now let's select the selection tool here, and we can move the layer as a whole. R for rotation, rotate the layer. S for scale, scale the layer. So as you see here, the two pieces are effectively independent of each other. And we can even have keyframe transformations on the triangle over time. This is pretty cool. By working with masks, it's easy to animate them or use them to change the shape of a footage layer. All right, let's put all these pieces together to show you how they could be used for a finished design. All right, all these pieces come together to create a nice motion graphics element. Maybe it's for in-store display or digital signage or something for the web. Here, I've put all the pieces together. let's build it up. First up, we have our individual footage layer. That works well. I like this footage of somebody browsing through different mixtapes. For you, love songs. Now, as we look at that, I now have another copy of the footage layer. Well, what's going on there? Here, we applied a mask to that layer. But I want to point something out. Instead of masking it inside the shape, under the mask properties here, we clicked inverted. And now we're seeing the purple layer outside the shape. This is pretty cool. Gives us the ability to see all those pieces working together. Now I've got one more instance of the footage layer. Here it is. But you might be wondering what's happening. Well, let's put this back to normal mode for a second. Here, if we look at the effects, we applied the Lumetri color effect. This is the same color effect you'd use inside of Premiere Pro. And all we did was some pretty basic transformations. Tweaked the saturation and played a little bit with things like some of the overall style. Took the color and just pushed it a bit. So we have a less saturated image. So instead of it being full color at 100%, we took it down to just a hint of color, barely a touch. And by blending it, it mixes together. Now, if you know what blending mode you want, you can just pick them. But if you don't, choose the Move tool and select the layer. Now, just like Photoshop, you can do Shift+, and this will let you try out different blending modes. And you can see the effect of mixing the two together. So here, I went with a mode like Hard Light. And what that did was a cool effect. It took that desaturated look and just mixed it with the color footage, but it also blended it into the purple zone here. I really like that transformation. Now we're getting a cool layered or blended effect. Next, we had the overall play triangle. Well, that's not used. If a layer is disabled, you won't see it when you render. You can delete it, but I'm going to leave it in here so that I can actually come back to it if I ever need to. But what I can do is mark it as shy. This little icon here is one of the most misunderstood parts of After Effects. Shy layers hide behind the wall. So if you enable the shy switch, looks like the old Kilroy icon here, now what happens is it disappears. It's still in the project, it's still in the timeline, but you've hidden it from view, both because I disabled its visibility and I hid shy layers, so it cuts down on the clutter. Here's our next one, and I'm going to turn that off and also mark it as shy. We have a purple layer here, and this is interesting. Notice how it's creating a cool vignette effect. Well, how's it doing that? Well, if we twirl it down, you'll see I applied a mask. Let's delete it for a moment. That purple layer has its own blending mode in place. We're using the multiply mode. And if we look at the opacity of that, you can blend that in to create an effect. Now, with the layer selected, I can come up here and choose the ellipse tool. And if I double click on this icon, watch what happens. Boom, a very straightforward ellipse. Let's twirl down the mask and feather that for a soft edge. But instead of it being purple in the middle and bright at the edges, let's just invert it. And now we get a really cool vignette effect that brings that purple back. We can play with the feathering of the edge. We can expand it to grow in or out and really refine the vignette effect. Lastly, here's that other piece we built, that nested comp earlier. And inside are all the pieces. This means if we needed to make a change, we could step in and do so. But what's really cool here, if we take a look at the finished piece, is I was able to scale and position that into the corner as if it were its own element. After Effects comps can be dropped into other After Effects comps. It's a lot like getting packed to go on vacation. You could take all your toiletries and put it into your toiletry bag and then put that into your suitcase. You could take a garment bag and put your clothes inside of that, and then your toothpaste doesn't get on your underwear. But in any case here, by working with different pieces, you can nest all those pieces together to create a composite effect like you see. So here we've got masks, and we've got pre-comps, and we've got blending modes. And I know when you looked at the individual pieces, you might not have seen them all together, but you can combine those. So feel free to open up this project and explore it a little bit more and look at how the different motion pieces come together. Footage plus masks plus pre-comps and a little bit of blending mode magic, and you're on your way to a great design quickly.